Have you ever wondered why your body feels like it's shutting down no matter how much you rest? Are you tired of just pushing through despite your symptoms when deep down you know that it isn't the path to feeling better? If that sounds like you, you're not alone. So many of us living with chronic conditions like lupus, chronic fatigue, and narcolepsy find ourselves caught between medical treatments that help a little and the deeper unanswered question of why the body is struggling in the first place. Welcome back to the Health Bridge podcast. I'm your host, Holly B., and I help women with chronic illness restore energy, reduce inflammation, and rebuild trust with their bodies so they can live the lives they're meant to live. Today, I am joined by one of my coaching clients, Allison Darwin, who went from pushing through daily overwhelming exhaustion and feeling like her body was failing her due to her narcolepsy diagnosis to experiencing real regulation, deeper energy, and an entirely new connection to herself. By the end of this episode, you'll understand what actually shifts when healing happens at the level of the nervous system and the body's inner communication, not just symptom management. Stick around because this conversation is full of hope. Today feels really special because I am being joined by someone who has actually walked this path with me firsthand. She's not just a guest, but she is one of the women who has actually walked through the health protocol and experienced some really profound shifts. Allison, I just want to thank you so much for being here and being willing to share your experience.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you, Holly, for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. So, before we get into like your healing story, can you just share a little bit about yourself? What are your passions? What's your life like? Who are you as a person? Just to set the stage.
Well, I'm a mom and I have 4-year-old twins who are almost 4.5. As far as passions, that my family life is a big passion. I enjoy nature. I've been on a spiritual journey over these past several years that kind of goes alongside motherhood and the health journey, and that is becoming one of my passions. And yeah, I'm just kind of on the journey of life. And
You've been a bit of an entrepreneur for quite a while as well.
yes, yeah, I've done a number of, I was a financial advisor for many years, and then I was a web designer. So have been part of the entrepreneur path, and now I'm in process of exploring my next endeavor, which I
Perfect.
expect to be related to my health journey and transformation.
Let's go back to before we started working together. What types of things were you experiencing with your health, with your mental, spiritual body? Like, where were you at before we met each other?
Well, the one thing that really sticks out to me, because I did work with a coach prior to doing the Health Bridge program, which did start my transformation. But I remember when right before we had met that it had just kind of come into my awareness, this idea of changing the relationship with your body. I had heard a meditation teacher who I believe she experienced debilitating headaches, and I heard her talk about how she was kind of befriending her body and thinking about it, doing the best that it could. And this is significant because I remember when we met that you told me how your mindset, that was just the one thing, how you worked on your mindset first. And I remember I didn't tell you anything about having any sort of chronic, because we met as part of a networking event. And because I didn't tell anybody really about what I experienced in my health. And I was just like listening. And then after we finished our networking chat, I remember I emailed you and I said that I was interested in working on that. And I think one reason why it's just so profound, because I feel like that topic is like really where the significant shifts have happened for me and are continuing to happen now.
Yeah, through the mindset work
Yes.
and how that creates an experience in our life, whether that's physical, emotional, spiritual, and how we relate to the people in our life as well, right?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
What did your daily life feel like in your body, like when it comes to the health symptoms that you were experiencing at the time?
Yeah. Well, I can take a moment and just explain at the time what I was still experiencing was a narcolepsy diagnosis. And, it's like I have been at different points in the journey. I mean, if I go way back before we met several years ago, I mean, that was like really debilitating because what narcolepsy is that there's a disruption in the sleep cycles. And so you don't get deep sleep. You don't get rest or restorative sleep. And that is what I experienced for really much all of my adult life. And then since I was a teenager. And at that point, I was really having difficulty functioning in daily life, but I didn't know it, right? I had no idea how low my baseline was. But for me, medication was a step when I did get a diagnosis and I started taking medication. I think of it as a bridge in itself where I was then able to get restorative sleep. And that did really mitigate a number of my symptoms, but I was still experiencing fatigue during the day. I would still, for a period, I used stimulants to help with that, various stimulants. And so I was experiencing, I would just call it like windows of pretty extreme fatigue. Still much way better than what it was like several years ago, right? But still, compared to how I feel now, I feel like amazing. And I believe that where we had met, again, I had started some of the mindset, but I hadn't really seen those symptoms, what I would call like residual symptoms, what I was still experiencing with the medication. I had yet to really see those change. And again, just to clarify what that looks like, it was kind of I would have a wave of fatigue like in the morning, a wave in the afternoon, and then often like around like 8 o'clock.
And you were taking naps daily?
Yes.
Which is
Sometimes,
probably hard
sometimes,
with, I
yeah.
was gonna say, which is probably hard with kids.
Yeah. I mean, I've had childcare support and my husband is able to, but yeah, at that time I was really having to, if I was, I mean, my husband and I would sort of work together around how I was managing the fatigue that I still experience.
I love that you did have really solid family support with your husband because so many women don't necessarily have that. And that might just be circumstances, of course, but even with that support, you were still struggling. You were going through all this fatigue. And what was the hardest part of that? Do you think it was more emotional or just hard dealing with those physical symptoms?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, much of my story in my 20s, I figured out what was happening and I just told myself I was fine. And I remember thinking, I was like, well, sleep is optional. I'm just a little bit more tired than everybody else. Of course, I mean, that was my early 20s. I had yet to really understand the impact of what it meant, both to really understand the impact of what was happening, to again miss out on this like deep restorative sleep. And yeah, and I had yet to really experience all of the symptoms that are under sort of the narcolepsy umbrella. And I mean, that denial and that pushing through stuck with me for a long time. And that's part of what I started to unwind once we started to work together. So I know that that's kind of a long answer to your question. I think probably the most difficult, I just feel like I had this kind of relationship with my body, to circle back with that again, where it's like I just had a separate agenda. It's like I wanted to do these things and my body wanted to do these other things. And it's like I was going to do what I wanted to do anyways. And I did that for a long, long time. And then eventually, it just didn't work anymore.
What I appreciate about you sharing that is that almost every woman, I think, with some sort of autoimmune or chronic health issue can relate to that. I know I certainly can. We just have this thing where we're told, I don't know if it's by society, it is our family dynamics, or just our, like you said, our own personal agenda of like what I want to get done in a day. We push and push and push and ignore the symptoms, ignore the symptoms. It's going to be fine. I'll sleep tomorrow. And we just keep moving forward, ignoring the signs from our body that are getting louder and louder and louder. And at some point, if we don't shift the way we go about life, we're going to run into a wall.
Yes, absolutely. And I have run into several of those walls in mine.
Oh, well, it's interesting because we think that I think when we're in our 20s, we can get away with that for a while. Like we really can. I mean, what college kid is not partying and doing all the things at night, getting by in a few hours of sleep, cramming in their studying, still getting the grades? That's just how we live, and it's fun. And we think that we can just keep going forward that way. But as we get older, and depending on what our predispositions are, some of us hit that wall sooner than others. But I can certainly relate to that. And it's still, that programming is still there. I'm just aware of it now. We can learn to become aware of the programming and to start to unravel.
Yes, absolutely. Awareness is that first step, I've heard on your podcast as you teach and have learned from you.
And I'm curious, was there a specific moment or anything that happened where you realized that you needed a different approach, or did it come to you more gradually?
Well, I feel like I had several of those in my health, in my journey, because as I said, so in my 20s, I was like, I'm fine. And I mean, I remember that really what prompted me at the time. I was working as a financial advisor, and I had a client who was experiencing a serious brain injury diagnosis. And that is actually what made me decide to go finally get a diagnosis, because one of the symptoms of the type of narcolepsy that I experience is called cataplexy, and it's actually what causes people to collapse. And for me at the time, I would not actually drop something, but it could cause me to I was able to sort of ward it off, or I would feel like my knees buckle. So there's kind of like this neurological thing. That's what prompted me to go get a diagnosis at the time. But yeah, and it was really actually my doctor who I saw then, and I told him I was fine, that I didn't need medication. And he was kind of the first person who really actually like listened and said, he was like, what you're dealing with is very serious. And I remember he's like, I'm concerned about you. You just told me all these. He basically recapped to me the way that I was coping, which I sort of thought I was fine. And I think hearing that back, I just remember sitting outside the hospital, and it like really started to hit me like the impact that this was having on my life. And so that was just like, and then it really started to show up in like my work and this was at this point. So I had a diagnosis. I was like waiting. I was doing the sleep studies. I had to do that before I could start medication to be able to get insurance to cover. And I was really experiencing pretty extreme insomnia where I was just up for hours in the night. And that's really what clued me in that I had like a big problem because, you stay up. I was then staying awake, like wide awake, up. And I basically felt the same the next day, even though I had been awake for hours in the night. And yeah, I think at that point I just gave up the pushing. Because I remember actually this one weekend where we were planning to go see my brother, and he lives near me. And I remember just thinking that I didn't want to I was like, I don't want to fight through the fatigue to like have to sit and visit. And so those types of things started showing up, and I was still trying to go to the gym and run and do the things that I did. And I kept getting these. I remember telling my now husband, and, I was like, every time I go to the gym, I was like, I keep like getting sick, I keep. So these are kind of the things and then it just was like the big wake up call, I think, was maybe again during that period where I realized I needed help and I was just waiting for the sleep studies. It kind of all hit me. Again, this like predates us working together, but I think it is still relevant because the work that we did together is ultimately still a significant part of my overall, like where I am now. But I think if I really want to be honest about where did I start or where were the walls, like going back further is probably the best place to start.
When you met me and we started chatting about the mindset work that I had done and what a significant impact that made in my health journey. What helped you say yes to working together?
Well, one, it was just so timely. I mean, I just really remember it being like this light bulb moment. Like, and it was something that I remember I reflected on after we had talked. I was like, hey, and it was such like, I think it was such a big shift for me, this idea of like befriending your body and befriending your body, but also befriending your symptoms, your sensations, what your experience. That to me was just like such a major paradigm shift. And so, and I'm a big, and at this point, I just kind of following my intuition. I just had this gut feeling. I just had this good feeling about you and I just go ahead and spoiler alert, it all played out of that. It was like the right thing for me to do, that there was something in it for me. And that's how I make many decisions these days. So
I love that. You mentioned the idea of befriending your symptoms, of listening to them more as messages rather than the enemy and things you have to fight through. In addition to that, are there other parts of the Health Bridge protocol that we've gone through that you found really supportive in the journey?
well, I think that at first I want to acknowledge you as a supportive coach, for one, as being like, I mean, I just think that that is so critical for anybody on this journey. It's like, and I loved how at the beginning of when you open the podcast of us walking alongside each other, because that's really what it is. I think that's what working with a coach is somebody who is by your side. They're not necessarily forcing you to do anything or make decisions for like you are still in charge, like you're still in the driver's seat, but they're just there supporting you. And I just think it's so important because I feel that the healing journey can feel like you're like stuck in a hole and there's all these different ways that maybe you can get out, like a climbing wall or something or like ladders, but it can be like, well, which way do I go first? And it can also be like, well, how much of a change do I make? Or it can be just so overwhelming. And that's what I just feel like having a coach is so helpful in helping you make those tiny little changes that really add up over time. So I just wanted to acknowledge that you as a supportive coach is really like the highlight of the program. And I also want to say that it would be like a natural hesitation, I think, in working with any coach to be like, is this person going to judge me? Or are they going to, make me want to? And I just want to get that out there that no, if you work with Holly, like you will not feel judged. Like she has been there more than likely, and wherever you are. And I just feel like you're very non-judgmental and just supportive person, kind and open. And so I just want to dispel any sort of hesitation that anybody might have, that because I think once you're looking at somebody who's kind of at further ahead of you on the journey, it can feel that way. Or it can be like, am I going to be pushed into something I don't want to do or I'm not ready for? So I just want to kind of wipe that away. And as far as other things that I loved about the program, yeah, I really think that the educational content is very digestible, and I really just felt like it flowed very well with like the one-to-one coaching. And I felt like you were so wonderful at like picking like one thing at a time. Because that has been, especially like on the lifestyle, like the diet and the food side for me, that is how I made significant change, one thing at a time. And I think being a mom of twins has really forced me to do that. I think the way I did things before, like several years ago, is like I tried to just overhaul it all, right? Overnight. And that never worked. you know, I mean, it might work for some people, and that's great. If it works for you, that's great. But I think more than likely, especially once we're dealing with like daily habits and things we've been doing in a long time or things that are new, it's more likely going to be those tiny changes. So I think having kind of being armed and empowered with the knowledge yourself, but then also having a guide with you, that's just a great combo.
Thank you for that. I think what you highlighted there about doing small changes and one thing at a time as opposed to the whole life overhaul. I just think that when we are in states where we're at this point where we're ready, we need help because it is overwhelming when you have chronic conditions and you've been pushing through and you don't know another way of really going about things. It's very tempting to go for the life overhaul. Your nervous system is not ready for that. Your nervous system might, your body might need that, but your nervous system and your mind aren't ready to go for that yet. We have to implement things in small, steady increments and try things as we go. Because also, when you try to do the whole life overhaul, then you don't necessarily know what's working and what isn't. So if you're starting, like you talked about the nutrition, if you're starting one thing at a time, you can gauge how well that thing is shifting for you. Am I feeling better? Am I feeling worse? Do I need to add more of that? Do I need to take out more of that? That's a lot easier to gauge. And when you have a chronic health issue, it's imperative that we figure out what our sensitivities are. And so if we're I mean, there's two ways of going about it. If we're talking about nutrition, of course, we can do a whole elimination diet, which is sort of an overhaul, and then add things back in, or we can just work with one thing at a time. I think that's an exception where an elimination diet can be very beneficial. But in going through the nutrition section with me, I like to give all the options. I like to highlight what has worked for people, what has worked for me, that doesn't necessarily resonate with everyone. I did carnivore. Not everybody's going to want to jump into carnivore. So I understand that. And I'm not here to push anybody into that. Yeah. Again, one thing at a time, I think is just so key. The more and more and more I get into understanding of the nervous system, the more I realize that it's really those micro movements, those micro shifts that make the biggest difference over a long period of time. And when you've been when you've got to this point where you're like asking for help, you've definitely been through it for a long time. So, like, let's calm down. Let's not try to change our world overnight. And let's do things that we can stick with and be consistent with, because that's what's going to shift your whole life trajectory in the long run. Really quick, Holly B here. I just wanted to interrupt the podcast to ask you for a quick favor. Can you take just a moment to like and subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you are listening in on? It makes a world of a difference. And the reach of this podcast, it takes like literally under 10 seconds. So go do that right now. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And now back to the episode.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to just sort of the word that's coming to me is flexibility. And when you talked about like the diet and how, the animal base being part of the program. And so I just wanted to highlight that because that would be something else I would want somebody who's considering the program to know that you're not, again, saying that this is like the only way and you must do this, or that there is the flexibility there. Flexibility both, I think, on philosophy, but also just in the reality of like, your day-to-day life and how that may take time to shift. Yeah, and I want to highlight too that there were many things that we came up against where you were pushing back on because it shifts the daily nuances that you're already used to, such as getting morning light right when you get up. I remember that one was a little, well, but the kids wake up at this time and then I got to do this and then I don't know if I can do that. But slowly you were able to incorporate more of that in. And so we can learn these things in one video or two videos or an hour session, but that doesn't mean I'm expecting you to implement everything overnight. It's how do we make this work for you? Exactly. So when you started feeling some shifts,
Where would you say you felt it the most? Would it be in your physical body, in your symptom management, or in your energy?
Well, I would definitely, I mean, there is a significant period or like moment even where my fatigue just started to melt away. And again, for me, I think that it was really in the realm of the nervous system regulation, the neuroplasticity, the developing a loving relationship for myself and all of those things were kind of coming together because I just had this moment where I remember one morning I was, at this point I was still feeling this kind of wave of fatigue at 10 o'clock, about 10 o'clock in the morning. So I would get up, like 6:30, get the kids up off to school, and then I would get hit. I mean, maybe it'd be kind of earlier, even like 9 o'clock. And I remember that it was so frustrating to me because I was just like, I want to get up, I want to do things. And I just remember this moment I was in my room and I just said, I was like, you know what? I was like, if this is what my body is telling me that it needs to rest, I'm just going to listen. And I just started, and usually with that morning fatigue, I would just push through, right? I would just do whatever I was, but I just started like embracing it and I just went back to bed. And after I did that, which I really think was kind of accepting myself on like a whole nother level, that fatigue, that morning fatigue just started shifting. And I mean, it was like a week by week thing. And what was interesting for me is that we were going into like the warmer months and typically heat had been like a trigger for fatigue. And I just remember I was out, where I live, it can be very humid. I was out for a walk in the morning and it was hot and it was humid and I like wasn't having any fatigue coming on. And I was just like, what is happening? So it was a real, like, that's when I started to develop the faith that healing was possible for me. And I think I just want to touch on that for a moment because that is another like intangible and I think unquantifiable value of a coach is that whether maybe you're at the beginning of the journey, I think a coach can help hold that faith that healing is possible for you when you can't. And maybe it's because like you just feel like you're so deep in the pain that you just can't see, like you just can't see a way out. Like you see other people are doing it, but you're like, well, I don't see how. Because I think for myself, if we were to interview myself 6 or 7 years ago, what I would probably say about me is that I didn't have narcolepsy because there would be no way that I could experience what I was experiencing then and then feel like I do now. Like I wouldn't be able to I wouldn't be able to find a path in my logical mind. So that's what I think a coach again can just like hold that belief for you. And then also in those moments where like because we've talked about this separately, but I think you have these kind of breakthroughs in healing, like I'm describing where this fatigue was shifting, but then it like backtracks a little bit, which can be really like defeating, particularly if you've been dealing with something for like 15, 20 years. Then I really think it is embedded in your nervous system. I am really seeing that now over the past 3 months when I've had little like backtrack. I don't want to call it backtracking. That's not, but I've just had resurfacing of symptoms and I really feel it in my body and in my nervous system. Like I get an anxiety that it's coming back. So I just, again, going back to reasons to have a coach, I think helping. So almost like a placeholder for your faith. And then once you experience it, then you can start to build that. So that was like a long tangent to your question.
No, but it's an important aspect of the journey. And you talked about your logical mind wouldn't be able to place yourself in a world where you could be healing from your symptoms, where you could feel good. And we get so stuck because this is part of my story too, and seeing things realistically or seeing things logically and factually. Like I just thought that I was being realistic when I thought of all of my limitations. And it wasn't until I finally dove into all the mindset work that I realized that those facts were just stories I was telling myself and then believing. I mean, we can't we don't have control over everything, of course, but we can control the way we react or respond to things. And so just that simple shift of, okay, am I reacting to this or am I responding to this? Just that subtle shift can change trajectories. Just becoming aware of those stories, those factual, realistic stories that we've been believing and telling ourselves, that awareness is where that's where that magic turning point can happen, where we can start to crack the door open to other possibilities of like, well, why do I believe this? Why have I been telling myself this story? Do I actually have facts to back this up? And even if I do, does that mean that they pertain to me? Or is this just stuff that's happened to other people and therefore I'm taking it on as my own? So I think slowly unraveling those stories again and those patterns that we've been stuck in is absolutely essential to creating a different health outcome for ourselves. And I don't see a way to healing around in circumventing that. Like it's just part of it. You have to do it. You have to be able to open your mind to different possibilities. And that's not even just with health, that's with relationships, that's with work, entrepreneurship, like just with life in general. If we keep ourselves stuck in these stories, nothing's ever going to change. Change is hard, change is scary. We got to open the door and look through that door that we've kept slammed shut for a long time. But that's where all the magic is if we're willing to get uncomfortable.
Well, and two, I think it's also leaving room for the unknown, right? Because it's like when you talk about the facts, it's I think about with narcolepsy. I mean, what I have been told and what I still believe to be factually true is that there's been like damage to the molecules in the brain, and that's what's causing this disruption in the sleep cycles. But we've always been taught that, I mean, the conventional perspective is like the body as a machine, right? It's a mechanical and something breaks. It's like, that's it. And so I think you can hold space for the facts. I mean, that's sort of, and that's where, especially the sleep stuff, it's like, I just kept going back to that with any sleep hygiene thing. It's like, I was like, well, I have this thing that has broken. And so these sleep hygiene things that work for other people, how are they going to work for me? But it's like, I think we can hold space for the facts and what is unknown, which I think inherently there have to be things unknown in with the body and with science and in medicine. And I mean, that's just, and that's some of how I've, I'm pretty much like sleeping. It seems like kind of like a normal person. Like, I mean, I don't really know what or I don't want to use the word normal, but somebody who doesn't have the experience or the narcolepsy diagnosis that I have, but I'm sleeping like nights. I'm having minimal dreaming, which any person who experiences narcolepsy hearing this is like a radical, is like, how is that even possible? But I think that's to go back once you do experience that just little shift. And I think the thing that is kind of exciting to me is like I feel like it just took a little shift in my symptoms where it just like really then that door opened of like, wait a second, like it is possible. And so I don't know if
Yeah.
that was true for you, but and then that just kept going. And then it's like, well, wait, what is possible? What is possible? And then I think you get that momentum. And then it's like, you just sort of, then it's like anything's possible, which I also want to say it was a process to get there for me. And where I am now, I mean, this is like years, right? So for anybody who's listening and it just seems like out of touch, or I think that's normal because what we're talking about is it's a radical shift. It's a powerful shift, but if it sounds out of reach, I think that is normal because that's how it was for me too. Yeah.
And for me, what are some of the most significant changes that you've experienced just in, I don't know, maybe how you interact with your kids or with your life trajectory overall or relationships with family members, perhaps?
Well, I mean, one thing that's coming to mind that I feel that, I had such a shift in my like my energy and my demeanor and just and I feel like in the period of us working together, sometimes I like to say that in my healing journey, I learned how to chill. I've learned how to just like, I was such a high achiever, and that was really just what was driving. And that's now really coming back to me of like so many of my aha moments and working with you. I was really able to uncover how compulsory that was. The need to be achieving the goals and I mean, I was aware of the perfectionism and it's like I knew it was there, but I remember one call of like where I suddenly like I could suddenly see it as being part of my automatic behavior, that I always had to be achieving something, which is kind of like, it's kind of exhausting, right? And just being able to I mean, that's probably the most significant change that I've made in my life that has really rippled out because it affects everybody around me, and it's just allowed me to live with so much more ease. And I wanna clarify that there's nothing wrong with achieving. Achieving is great, but for me, again, it goes back to that it was like I didn't have a choice about it. It was like my automatic and it was where I was getting, like, my worth, my self-worth, and so if I wasn't achieving something, it's like I felt like a total failure. I felt like it was taking me away from my family in my mind. So that's just something that really comes to mind that I feel like it really underpins a lot of my health transformation and just how I just live life with so much more ease now. It doesn't mean that life is always easy, but that, you talked about the nervous system and that the constant going and constant doing is so much less now. And it's such a freer place to be. And I think that that is where we can really start to cultivate the environment for healing. Now, maybe I think every person has their own individual patterns that they're experiencing. This, the achiever, the perfectionist, that's me. The pushing, the doing. And it still comes back, it's something I'm still observing and it comes back. And then I was able to just continue to build on what we had done together as far as the diet changes and just implement those from a totally different place, like from a place of love for myself. And which I really believe comes from like the soul. That's just how I've experienced it. Whereas before, it was always from a place of self-criticism and always from a place of, oh, you're eating the wrong thing or you don't, and that I think in my journey, again, this is just what I have found to be true for myself, that was part of what was fueling the imbalance and, disorder and disease in my body was like the negative self-talk. And so I think that's where really, once you really start with that mindset and the nervous system and all of those things, it can kind of it underpins everything that you do and how you experience life.
Hey, I just wanted to jump in here and interrupt the program for just a hot minute. You know that I'm so passionate about this podcast, but what I'm also really passionate about is helping women with lupus minimize their symptoms, boost their energy so that they can indulge in life again. So if you are a woman who is struggling with lupus, who is sick and tired of being sick and tired, who's struggling to manage your flares, if you're finding that your lupus symptoms are just really getting in the way of you being able to live your life the way you want to, I feel you. I've been there myself and I felt the same way. And what I've found is that there are a certain set of health fundamentals that once applied, will support you in your foundational health. They will support you in building and maintaining that energy, minimizing flares, and allowing you to, again, indulge in life and follow your passions. So, if that is something that you are interested in creating for yourself, let's jump on a call together. I will walk you through the process that I use with my clients to get them from sick and tired to strong foundation of health by implementing my health bridge protocol. If this is something you're interested in chatting more about, I would love to talk to you. Apply for a free clarity call with me, and I look forward to getting to know you soon. And now back to the episode. I can relate to that so much. And I have no doubt that women that are listening to this that have been going through their own health journey can relate to that too. I think that negative self talk is so ingrained in so many of us that we don't even realize it's happening when we're doing it. I think what you said that was also so important is getting to making those nutritional changes from a soul nourishment, health
Yes,
nourishment
definitely.
perspective. Yeah, as opposed to like, well, I have to do this and I can't eat that. And my body's in fear because what if I eat the wrong thing? And, like for me, yeah, punishment. And for me, coming from fear when it was like, I don't know what to eat. I'm scared to eat. What if that triggers a flare up? What if that triggers my digestion issues? What if that triggers a rash? And so you come at it from fear a lot of times. And we see like 50 Instagrams a day about all the terrible things that are out there for you. And it's like, well, what am I supposed to eat? Nothing's safe. So, bringing it back to a space where we can just simplify things. We can see food as nourishment and we can choose to make healthier choices for ourselves. And we can take that on a day to day basis. We don't have to be perfect every single day, but we can slowly learn what nourishes us better than others. And I think that's just so important when it comes to this chronic health journey that so many of us are stuck in, is not seeing food as the enemy, recognizing what our thoughts are around our food, and then choosing to slow down and choosing to make intentional choices.
Yes, absolutely. And I just want to share just a brief it just popped into my mind when we were working together, and I remember maybe we were doing the section on kind of exploring what you were eating in a food journal, and I remember telling you that I had had a Kind bar, or that I was using Kind bars as like a snack, and I remember you saying there's worse things you can eat than a Kind bar. And it was just such a like forgiving, and that was like exactly what I needed at that time on my journey. And just, I think for anybody listening, considering working with you, I just think it's a really great example of that, the support and the grace that sometimes that we really need to give ourselves that grace. But I think when we're not giving it to ourselves, like a great coach can. And just like, I feel like the realness of your approach, like you get it. And I have used that line so many times. If at any moment I like, which, more recently I've been like really sticking to a whole foods diet, but there'll be something where like last week I made this granola and I kind of ate more than I like more, I sort of exceeded maybe what I was planning. And I went back to that. I was like, well, there's worse things I can eat, right? Because it just is like you need to have that grace with yourself on this because it's not going to be perfect. You know, it, chasing perfection is, many of us do it. I do it. I mean, I'm often am now referring to myself as a recovering perfectionist. That's part of our conditioning. But that energy is, again, it goes back to, it's a fear-based energy, really. It's the opposite of love for yourself.
I just want to take a deep breath of like, yes, yes to everything you just said. And, life happens. Sometimes you get stuck and all you have is a Kind bar, or all you have, and I'm not even talking smack against Kind bars. I eat them sometimes too, even though I know they're not ideal for me. But if I'm in a pinch and there happens to be one nearby, or if I have to stop at a 7-Eleven, if I'm on a road trip or something and Kind bar is the best thing that's there, I'm going to get the Kind bar and I'm not going to feel bad about it. So I think having that grace with where we're at and recognizing that life happens, and maybe next time I can recall this and figure out how I can plan ahead a little bit better so I have the ideal snacks with me at the time. So I don't have to stop at the 7-Eleven on the road trip or whatever the case may be, or eat some crappy snack at the airport because I didn't plan ahead and make some hard boiled eggs and some bacon or whatever to bring with me. And I know some of you are like, bacon, how is that a healthy snack? We'll talk about that on another episode. If you could go back to yourself maybe 7 years ago, wherever you were really struggling the most, what would you want that Allison to know?
You don't have to do it alone. Even though, because my healing journey was trickling in then. I didn't know it yet, but that's just what I think the sooner that you can get help, the sooner, you will find your way to healing. Because I think just trying to do it on your own is just, you're sort of in that, it just puts so much more on you. I just think it's like overwhelming, and it's like, I was overwhelmed at that point. I didn't really know it. I didn't think of myself as overwhelmed, but like looking back, I can see it now. And I was so resistant to getting help. And that, I think, was one of my patterns, right? You got to do it on your own, everything on your own, right? That's why I was resistant to getting a diagnosis. I was resistant to medication. And yeah. So that's what I would tell myself, is to just that it's okay to be vulnerable, right? That's something that I am learning now. It's okay to ask for help.
For the woman that's teetering on the edge of knowing they have these overwhelming things going on in their life, but they're not quite sure if coaching is right for them, what would you reiterate to them?
Well, I think that really it's just one tiny step at a time. And that next tiny step might be just getting on a call with you and just seeing if there's a connection. And I just feel like ultimately we all, the healer's on the inside, and there's that intuition that knows who can help you or who is the right fit. And I just feel like if you get on a call, you're able to, again, interact with the person and learn more about your individual situation and start to see another possibility for yourself.
Just know that in my journey, having other coaches and having other outside help and outside perspectives helps so much, because you can't always see everything that's going on as somebody else can in hearing you talk and hearing you go through your journey. It's easy for me to hear you talk and say, oh, you're blocking yourself there, but we can't always see that for ourselves. Allison, I just want to thank you so much for being so open with your journey and for sharing your heart with us in this conversation. Definitely watching you go through your journey as we've worked together and beyond, as we've stayed friends, has been just really something special for me to witness. And I just know that as you develop your purpose that you're stepping into now, and from this much calmer place, is going to shine so much light into the world and into your family and into your community. And it's really been an honor to witness this as it unfolds. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, of course. And thank you, Holly. I like to think of the healing journey. It's kind of like you're walking on a trail, and you run into people who then walk with you, like you said at the beginning, and you're one of those people for me. I feel like I was just on my path and you were like sitting on a lawn, and then you got up and walked with me. And then, we parted ways when I had like reached a certain place. And so thank you.
Thank you so much to Allison for sharing her story so openly today. I hope that you're walking away with a sense of possibility, knowing that healing is not linear, but it is possible when we reconnect the mind, body, and spirit. If this episode spoke to you, remember, you don't have to navigate chronic illness alone. You can find the link to apply for a free healing breakthrough call in the show notes. I look forward to connecting with you if you are ready to explore deeper support. Until next time, take a deep breath, give yourself grace, and keep building your bridge back to health.